We're going to get started here. My name is Oliver Rosales, and I'm a professor of history at Bakersfield College, and also the faculty coordinator for the Social Justice Institute at Bakersfield College, which is hosting this event. So I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about the grant project that has facilitated this evening's event, along with a whole host of other events the past few years. And I'll explain the format as well. After I give my introductory remarks and introduce the speaker, we'll hear from our guest presenter, and we'll also have time for a Q&A session with the author. And you're welcome to use the chat and Q&A box if you have a question that you'd like the speaker to answer. I will say that I did get my first questions this morning, so I promise to get to those already from folks who are excited about this presentation. The Social Justice Institute was founded by Bakersfield College President Sonia Christian and fellow administrators in collaboration with local community leaders, including the late Mayor Harvey Hall and the philanthropist and lawyer Milt Younger. A nonpartisan entity at Bakersfield College, the Social Justice Institute explores issues of equity that affect Bakersfield College students and the diverse local communities that the college serves. The Social Justice Institute hosts public speaking engagements and events featuring scholars, authors, and cultural bearers whose work and experiences speak to both equity and the significance of local cultures, histories, and narratives. Energizing the Humanities in the San Joaquin Valley is a 3-year grant project from interdisciplinary humanities perspectives, promoting cultural competency in humanities instruction at Bakersfield College. This is funded in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities initiatives at community colleges, and is directed by myself and professors Andrew Bond and Josh Autumn. Historically, the Southern San Joaquin Valley has been an epicenter of labor and civil rights activism in California and beyond throughout the 20th century, stemming especially from the broad impact of the farm labor movement at the state and national levels. And it's really in that capacity, especially, that I'm so excited to introduce LeRoy Chatfield. LeRoy Chatfield is a former organizer who worked with Cesar Chavez to get union recognition for California farm workers, created a Saturday school educational enrichment program for farm worker children in Bakersfield, managed the Northern California general election campaign for Jerry Brown, and built the largest volunteer charitable organization in Sacramento. And this is a summary of his book project, which he's going to speak tonight. The long pilgrimage of LeRoy Chatfield weaves its way through multiple collective projects designed to better the condition of the marginalized and forgotten. From the cloisters of the Christian Brothers and the halls of secondary education to the fields of Central California and the streets of Sacramento, Chatfield's story reveals a fierce commitment to those who were denied the promises of the American dream. In this collection of what the author calls easy essays, Chatfield recounts his childhood, explains the social issues that have played a significant role in his life and work, and uncovers the lack of justice he saw all too frequently. His journey alongside Cesar Chavez and Helen Chavez, Marshall Gans, Bonnie Chatfield, Philip Veracruz, and countless others displays an unwavering focus on organizing communities and expanding their agency. Follow and explore a life dedicated to equality of opportunity for all. May it inspire and guide you in your quest for a fair and more just society. So having said that, we welcome LeRoy Chatfield. Andrew, you might have to cue LeRoy here.
He's got to unmute himself.
I just did, didn't I?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, am I ready to go? Thank you, Professor Rosales, for your generous and kind introduction. and I thank everyone at Bakersfield College who made this Cesar Chavez presentation event possible. Before I begin my presentation, I need to say a few words. I ask your indulgence. For the last 10 years, I have been publishing online my Syndic literary journal. Not only do I publish the work of authors, artists, and poets from the United States, but also from those around the world. If you might wish to access Syndic, just search for syndicjournal.us. Syndic is spelled S-Y-N-D-I-C, syndicjournal.us. One of the poets I publish is a Palestinian poet, Rasha Mansour. Rasha emailed me yesterday to say that she had registered for my Cesar Chavez presentation and she was looking forward to it. Rasha, this is LeRoy. Thank you for being present with us this afternoon. I am pleased to share my Cesar Chavez presentation with you. Have you been able to get your COVID vaccination shots yet? I hope so, because this is very important and I am concerned about you. Please continue to write poetry. Send it to me so I can publish it in Syndic. I love your poetry. Take care. All the best for you. In October 2019, the University of New Mexico Press published my book, To Serve the People, My Life Organizing with Cesar Chavez and the Poor. Because my background is somewhat unusual and not easily understood, I believe it might be helpful to provide some personal commentary by way of explanation. I entitled this Changes of Life. In 1963, I met Cesar Chavez in Delano when he was organizing his National Farm Workers Association. I was a Christian brother teaching at Garces High School in Bakersfield. We hit it off and became very close friends. Because of my own concerns about the plight of farm worker children, I started a Saturday school educational program for farm worker children living in the Cottonwood Road area of Bakersfield. And then the following year, I organized a full-blown summer school for farm worker children in Delano and in Bakersfield for farm worker children living in the Cottonwood Road and La Lomas areas. 2 years later, on October 15th, 1965 to be exact, at the age of 31, I moved to Delano, California to help my friend Cesar Chavez with the Delano grape strike. I came to help because a few weeks earlier, he had called me at USC, where I had been assigned by my religious superiors to begin a doctoral program in social work. He said he needed help with the Delano farm workers strike, and could I come to help him? I said I would. I resigned from my 15-year religious vocation as a member of the Christian Brothers, left my 9-year career as a high school teacher and administrator, packed my few personal belongings and started a new life, working with my friend Cesar Chavez and his farm worker movement. Consider this. I was 31 years old without $1 in my pocket. I had agreed to take a brand new job working with Cesar Chavez to do something I knew nothing about. And I was not going to get paid to do it. And not only that, but I also need to explain that from the age of 15 until age 31, I had lived, studied, and worked in a 100% male religious organization environment, namely the Christian Brothers Monastic Religious Teaching Order. That was the only life I knew. Because I was required to take the religious vow of poverty, I owned nothing, literally nothing. The only clothes I possessed were those suitable for my status as a religious cleric. I did not even possess a government issue Social Security card because as a Christian brother, I was never paid for my work as a high school teacher. And if that doesn't sound strange enough, I hasten to add that because I had taken the religious vow of chastity, I never had personal friendships or purely social interactions with women, but only professional interactions that were work-related. In my teenage years, I never hung out with friends and talked about girls. I never attended school dances or the prom. I never dated or held hands or ever kissed a girlfriend. Not that I disapprove any sheltered life and communication or
Leroy, you're getting a little bit of feedback. Could you pause for a moment so we can try to fix the feedback issue?
with the outside. In fact, I lived outside the box of normal human interpersonal relationships between men and women. But now, in 1965, for the first time in my life, because I had agreed to help Cesar Chavez, I was going to live inside the box of interpersonal relationships. I was a fish out of water. I knew it. More importantly, I felt it. Yes, I was now an eligible bachelor. And yes, I was employed, but without money or income. And I had no personal experience or knowledge about the social skills I would need to meet and interact with persons of the opposite sex. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you score my marriage readiness or my chances of forging a long-term relationship with a woman? Or given my background and newly with me? I don't know your score, but I will give you mine. Off the scale, a -2. And yet, despite my personal fish out of water, lack of marriage readiness rating, I am pleased to tell you, I have been married 55 years to Bonnie Burns Chatfield. We have 5 married daughters and 10 grandchildren. I think you will agree with me that Bonnie Burns had her work cut out for her, but thank God she was up to the task. Looking back over the 86 years of my life, I realized I have had several life changes. I prefer to call them life-saving events. My parents saved my life when at age 15, they sent me away from home to attend the Christian Brothers boarding school in Sacramento. Brother Gilbert, who was in charge of the boarding school, saved my life when he encouraged me to enter the Christian Brothers. Cesar Chavez saved my life when he asked me to come to Delano to help him with the Delano grape strike. Bonnie Burns saved my life when she agreed to marry me. Governor Brown saved my life when he asked me to manage his first Northern California campaign for governor. Dan Delaney saved my life when he asked me to be the first director of Loaves and Fishes in Sacramento. Jennifer Zabel saved my life when she taught me step by step, ever so patiently, how to publish my farm worker movement documentation project online. Professor Jorge Mariscal saved my life when he called me and said, "LeRoy, you need a book." Just how fortunate can one person be? I am eternally grateful. Thank you for being here today. I am honored. In conclusion, I offer you a homeless blessing I have heard for more than 20 years at Loaves and Fishes. Thank you. God bless you. You saved my life. When at the request of my friend Cesar Chavez, I came to Delano, California in 1965 to join his farm worker movement, I soon learned the shocking history of Filipino farm workers, best summarized by New York Times reporter Jason DeParle. They are among the last of the Manongs, the approximately 100,000 Filipino men who flocked to America in the years before the Depression, seeking education and wealth, but finding instead impoverished lives of stoop labor and racial codes that forbade them to own land or marry. Forbidden to marry. Without doubt, this has to be one of the saddest chapters in the long and cruel history of recruiting and using cheap immigrant labor in the history of California agribusiness. Forbidden to be husbands. Forbidden to be fathers of a family. Forbidden to enjoy the love and respect of their grandchildren. They were free to work in the fields, to enjoy a life of bachelorhood and profound loneliness. Forbidden to own land. You are not from here. You cannot stay here. You must leave here when your harvest job is finished. You are not welcome to stay here. You must come back next year to work in the field. Would tear up and was barely able to keep his composure. He vowed that someday his farm worker movement would build a retirement center where the elderly Filipino brothers could live out their days in peace and tranquility. True to his word, the Agbayani Retirement Village was dedicated on the Union's 40 acres in Delano in 1974. I entitled this reading, Cesar Chavez. What was there about Cesar Chavez that would motivate me to change the entire course of my life and join with him and his cause to organize farm workers? Without doubt, what motivated me was the decision of Chavez and his wife, Helen, to live in voluntary poverty in order to be free to devote their entire lives to improve the lives of farm workers and to affirm their status as human beings. At this time in my life, I was a member of a Catholic religious teaching order, and I lived with a vow of poverty. I did not own anything, but I paid for nothing. I was provided with everything I needed. You cannot compare my poverty to that at-risk poverty embraced by Cesar and Helen Chavez and their 8 children. There was no comparison. Giving up pursuit me. But at the same time was also seeking to enrich him. Selfless leadership is rarely found. I was fortunate to
You know, Leroy, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I think your internet is a little bit slow and giving some audio feedback.
funds for movement on university campuses. I was raising funds for the farm worker movement on university campuses in Northern and Southern California. I was present at the March to Sacramento and present at Cesar's 25-day fast for nonviolence. I was with him at the funeral of Robert Kennedy. I directed the consumer boycott in Los Angeles, and I was present at the signing of the union contracts with the 30 Delano grape growers. I managed the day-to-day union operations when Cesar traveled a month at a time, stoking up the consumer boycott of grapes in the major cities of the United States and Canada. I was present at his 1972 fast in Phoenix, and I managed the 1972 California No on 22 campaign that defeated the grower initiative that could have prevented the unionization of farm workers. Because of my long-term involvement and close association with Chavez, it was only natural that those who were not present, for example, documentary filmmakers, historians, writers, and others, would want to interview me years after Chavez's death in 1993. Perhaps I have given as many as 15 such interviews, some of them lasting for many hours. What puzzled me about these interviews is why all the interviewers showed such little interest in Chavez's commitment to live a life of voluntary poverty in order to uplift the lives of farm workers. I tried to impress upon them how important this was, because not only did it completely free him up to serve others, but how much it impressed the farm workers he was organizing into a union. The workers viewed Chavez, a former farm worker, as a person who was sacrificing his life for them. He was a leader they could trust, and one who lived even poorer than they did. I also tried to explain to the interviewers how much Chavez's life of voluntary poverty impressed the hundreds of volunteers who joined his farm worker movement. I am still puzzled why they were reluctant to discuss this, or even ask follow-up questions, as they did with almost every other subject they asked me about. They simply changed the subject and pushed on to their next question. Let me leave you with this thought about the power of voluntary poverty. Francis of Assisi lived 800 years ago, and today he is still remembered and revered because he lived a life of voluntary poverty to help the indigent poor. The very reason why in the year 2013, the new Catholic Pope took the name Francis as his own. I also decided to volunteer with Cesar Chavez because he was an authentic indigenous leader. He was raised as a farm worker and knew firsthand their servitude because he had lived it himself. As a child growing up, he attended 28 elementary schools before dropping out of high school to work full-time in the fields. At 18, he joined the Navy and left his farm worker life behind. but he never forgot the exploitation he and his family members had endured. I entitled this reading, The 1966 300-Mile March to Sacramento, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, to April the 10th, Easter Sunday. 55 years ago this month, Cesar Chavez and his National Farm Workers Association began a 300-mile march to Sacramento to meet with Governor Pat Brown to seek his support for their Delano grape strike against 30 table grape growers in the Tulare and Kern counties of California. The table grape strike was started on September the 8th, 1965, by Filipino farm workers in the Delano area who were members of the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee of the AFL-CIO. Their labor dispute was over the wages the growers offered to pay for picking and field packing table grapes. $1.25 an hour plus 10 cents per box. Take it or leave it. A few weeks earlier, during the Coachella Valley harvest of table grapes, the growers had paid $1.40 per hour plus 25 cents per box. On September 16th, 1965, at the request of the AFL-CIO, Cesar Chavez and his National Farm Workers Association, which was composed mostly of Mexican-American farm workers, joined the Delano grape strike with the Filipinos. But their issue was not wages. It was union recognition. They wanted to be treated equally and enjoy the same labor rights and protections as all other workers in the United States. Even if the growers agreed to raise the wages, Chavez vowed, the NFWA would not stop their strike until they had secured the right to bargain collectively with the growers, not only about wages, but about working conditions, worker safety, and medical benefits. Thus began the 4-year labor war of the Delano grape strike. That growers would ever grant union recognition to their farm workers was unthinkable, not even possible, because for more than 50 years, farm workers were treated not like human beings, but more like farm implements or beasts of burden. How on earth did Cesar Chavez ever think his fledgling union could win union recognition? Here are the 3 reasons why Chavez would not be successful. Reason number 1, white supremacy. In 1935, when President Franklin Roosevelt signed into law the National Labor Relations Act that encouraged workers in the United States to unionize, and that this federal law would protect their rights to do so, this very same legislation specified that this new national labor law did not include farm workers and domestic workers. Now, I ask you, farm workers and domestic workers are Americans. Why should they not have the same rights as all other American workers? I'm sure you already know the answer. In the South, most farm workers were African American, and in the West, most farm workers were Mexican American immigrants. So, in the Jim Crow era of segregation in the 1930s, Roosevelt could not get the votes of the Southern senators to permit and to protect the unionization rights for workers of color. Nothing really surprising about this, just another example of old-fashioned white supremacy that began with slavery. Reason number 2, the economic power of the California table grape industry. Consider this. The 30 table grape growers who were struck by the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee of the AFL-CIO and Chavez's NFWA farm more than 120,000 acres of table grapes. The strike area would extend from Ducor, California in the north to Arvin, California in the south, a distance of 60 miles, with the average width of the strike area was approximately 5 miles. Let me give your imagination a visual of what this economic power looked like in 1965. If you stacked the field-packed boxes of table grapes 12 high, you could build a 7-foot-tall wall from Delano to Boston, a distance of 3,000 miles. This was the size of the table grape industry in California. Who ever heard of a labor strike that encompassed 300 square miles? No one. One of the largest strike areas among AFL-CIO unions was the United Auto Workers strike at the Ford Motor Plant in Fremont, California, that covered 32 fenced acres with multiple entrance gates where several thousand auto workers entered and exited to and from their work sites. Think about this for a minute. In an active labor strike zone, the union sets up picket lines, first of all, to inform the workers and the general public that there is a strike in progress, and asks their members not to cross the picket lines. If the struck company recruits strikebreakers, generally referred to as scabs, and urges them to cross the union's picket lines, then confrontation ensues. In the case of a 300 square mile farm worker strike zone against 30 employers, where are the harvest crews working today starting at dawn? Where does the union set up picket lines? How many picket lines do you need to cover 300 square miles? Table grape vines grow to a height of about 7 feet and a width of about 6 feet. They are spaced very close together in long rows that can run many hundreds of yards from the side of a narrow county road deep into the vineyard. Between the rows is a narrow open space that will accommodate a small tractor used during the growing seasons for weed control and fertilizing. Driving on a narrow county road through the vineyards in Kern County is similar to driving many miles through a very dense forest out in the middle of nowhere and seeing nothing except a narrow ribbon of road in front of you. There is no other traffic on the road, no road signs, no sign of human life. And if there are any farm worker crews in the vineyard, they cannot be seen. Believe me, it can be an eerie, unnerving, and solitary experience when you're driving by yourself. It feels like you might be on another planet. I'm not exaggerating. I have been there. Reason number 3, California history of failed farm workers' strikes. Despite being excluded from federal legislation that protected the rights of US workers to organize into unions, there were many attempts in the 1950s and early 60s by organized labor to unionize California farm workers. The primary catalyst for these organizing efforts was the use of harvest time strikes to increase wages and establish a union. But each and every organizing effort was systematically crushed by agribusiness that used its powerful influence in the rural communities where their farms were located. The police and sheriff departments were quick to arrest strikers and union organizers for any alleged violations of the law. Corporate lawyers petitioned the local courts to grant injunctions against picketing and other strike activities. District attorneys were quick to file charges with the court about alleged violations of these highly restrictive and probably unconstitutional injunctions. And judges wasted little time making their rulings, guilty as charged, and sentenced the union organizers and strikers to jail. Likewise, the local community newspapers fanned the fears of violence and civil disorder by raising the specter of the presence of outside agitators and communists as the cause of the labor unrest in the community. If the police and the courts were not enough to break the farm workers' strike, the corporate growers would bus in strikebreakers from as far away as the Mexican border to work the harvest. This was the final blow. Yet another chapter was written in the agonizing history of failed attempts to organize farm workers into a union. There you have it. I have given you the 3 reasons why Cesar Chavez could not win union recognition for his National Farm Workers Association. Now, I will show you how Chavez won his first union recognition, Shenley Industries, in May of 1966, and his second union recognition, to Georgia Corporation, in September 1966. And then 4 years later, in July 1970, signed union contracts with all 30 of the Delano grape growers. Si se puede. Yes, it can be done. Well, here you see in this photo, Cesar Chavez and his map marking out the 300-mile march to Sacramento. I'll begin by saying this. It's January 1966. The harvest season is finished. The growers did not raise wages. Chavez did not get his union recognition. The Delano grape strike was a failure. Failure? Are you serious? For a world-class organizer like Chavez, there is no such thing as failure. Only the seeds for victory and success. Chavez had a saying, the growers have the money, but not the time. The farm workers have the time, but not the money. Each side fights with the currency they have. One time I asked Cesar how long he thought it would take to win the strike. He thought for a minute and said, I'm prepared for 20 years. Chavez went on the offensive. He packed up the Delano strike and took it on a 300-mile march that would put his farm worker movement on the social justice map of the United States, right up there next to the civil rights movement in the South. How would Chavez accomplish this? As you can see from his map, en route to Sacramento, he would route the 300-mile march through 19 farm worker communities and organize them to join the march. In this photograph, Chavez shows the march route and lists the names of the towns to be organized: Ducor, Porterville, Lindsay, Farmersville, Visalia, Cutler, Parlier, Malaga, Highway City, Madera, Chowchilla, Merced, Livingston, Turlock, Modesto, Manteca, Stockton, Lodi, West Sacramento. Looking at the map there, right around his shoulder height, you can barely see 3 sentences, 3 words actually. These 3, they're the themes of the march. The first one is peregrinación, which means pilgrimage. Penitencia means penance. And revolution Revolución means revolution. Chavez explained each theme to the staff. Peregrinación. The pilgrimage stands not as a protest by Delano workers, but as a symbol of the needs of all the farm workers. Penitencia. The sufferings of the march are a penance for the sins of everyone on both sides of this bitter fight. Revolución. The march is a bid for the extension of the benefits of the great revolutions of America and Mexico to the poor of California. It is not just a demand for higher wages. It is the cause of a whole people who have been robbed of their dignity. Chavez also explained how to decorate the march. The banner, you bring the banner of Our Lady of Guadalupe, bring the cross, which symbolizes the crucifixion, American flags, NFWA strike flags, Mexican flags, protest signs, oversized banners for the rally, huelga armbands. Huelga is the Spanish word for strike, huelga, and the huelga pins. Chavez also explained how to organize each farm worker community that they went through. First of all, send an advance team of organizers to a town 2 days before the march would arrive. The advance team would ask for volunteers to provide the Delano strikers with overnight shelter, bathroom and shower facilities, evening dinner, breakfast the next morning, and also find a suitable indoor site for a farm worker rally in the evening. And third, the program for the evening rally would consist of entertainment, a performance by El Teatro Campesino, a reading of the Plan of Delano by Luis Valdez, and a closing speech by Cesar, both in English and Spanish, who would explain how important it was for farm workers to have their own union and how important the march to Sacramento was to accomplish this. Finally, he would ask them to join him on the march the next day. Chavez programmed the 300-mile march for national TV. These next photographs will show you why the national TV stations in New York City, CBS, NBC, ABC, remember, this is 1966. So when I say CBS and NBC and ABC, those were the national stations. It was as if the march had been programmed for them as a national pageant made for TV. Cesar Chavez, the pageant's indigenous farm worker leader, had created a national movement to embrace the cause of unionization of farm workers. Now let's go to the next photo, please. This is a photo of Cesar Chavez speaking at an evening rally during the 300-mile march. You can see, look at his eyes, he's dog tired, and he should be. He's probably walked 15 miles that day before he's giving this speech was probably 9 o'clock, maybe 9:30 at night. Look how he's holding on to the microphone to steady himself. In the background, you see the Thunderbird Eagle, which is the logo for his NFWA. It was created by an artist by the name of, drawing a blank now, sorry, it'll come to me in a minute. But in 1962, when Chavez founded his NFWA, this was the logo that they chose. One of the reasons why Chavez looks so agonized, to me anyway, is he had a terrible time on the march. Uh, he had blisters so bad that he could hardly walk, and some of the strikers really felt very bad for him and said that he should take a couple of days off so that he could continue the march, but he refused that, of course. You don't know stubborn unless you have met Cesar Chavez. Some days he walked with a cane. Other days, his daughter walked with him and gave him support. One time he tried walking in slippers to try to ease the pain. He had a terrible time. He made it, but he had a terrible time. I guess that was his penance, and he accepted it. The next slide. This is the evening entertainment. You have Luis Valdez on the far right. He grew up in a farm worker family and ultimately graduated from San Jose State University. Extremely talented narrator, actor, playwright. Next to him is Augustine Lara playing the guitar. He's a singer, songwriter from the Fresno area. And then next to him is Felipe Cantu, a farm worker. Notice his armband. All the strikers wore armbands with the logo. And the next to him is Gilbert Rubio. The El Teatro Campesino during the farm worker movement traveled throughout the United States mostly to college campuses, giving their street theater. And a friend of mine and colleague, Chuck Farnsworth, was a law student in his final year at Stanford University. He told me this story. He was in his final year at Stanford University, and he came out of the legal building and walked across the campus and happened to notice the El Teatro Campesino performing. And he stopped and watched them. And he said, "LeRoy, I was so impressed with the issues they were talking about and raising that when I passed the bar, I joined the farm worker movement for 2 years in Delano as an attorney." So go to the next slide. Talk about a leap of faith. How on earth would these strikers believe Cesar Chavez that they should undertake a 300-mile march? This is probably the second day of the strike. We're not sure. I wasn't sure. So I got a hold of Roberto Bustos, who the strikers had elected to be the captain of the march. And they called him El Capitan. And he still goes by that name these many years later. So I talked to El Capitan and I asked him, I said, "What day of the march is this?" He said, "I'm not sure it's the first day. It's probably the second day." And I said, "Well, there are 75 strikers there, no?" No. He said, "There are 77. I counted them every morning to make sure that everyone was present. There are 77 there." I said, "Does that include Chavez?" "Absolutely," he said. I have to tell you, if someone came along that road and stopped and said, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, "We're marching to Sacramento to meet with the governor," what else could he say but, "You're crazy"? The next slide. This is how crazy they were not. You see the Our Lady of Guadalupe in the front, American flag. Look at all the Welga flags. As far as the eye can see, you have marchers. I don't know how many are there, but there are a lot. Next slide, please. This is I wanted to show you the front of the march. This is, excuse me, Roberto Ramon is carrying the cross. And the cross represents the passion of Christ and the crucifixion, of course. And then there's the close-up of the banner of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and you see the strike eagle, the Welga eagle at the bottom, NFWA, and you see these white buttons. Those are Welga buttons. Up at the top of the cross, someone has used a Welga button to attach a rosary bead. And the palm branches are a symbol, a Lenten symbol of the passion and death of Christ, the Holy Week. So, and you see the American flag. Next slide, please. Wow. Can you believe that photo? What do you think CBS, NBC, and ABC thought about that photo? Thousands. They're taking up almost the entire highway. But when you look closely, what I see mostly is women and children, but lots and lots of women. And it's no secret, to me at least, there is no secret that in the farm worker movement, women were the backbone of the farm worker movement and the Delano grape strike and the Delano and the boycott grape movement. You have to remember, this is 1966. This is early on in the in the women's movement. And I can tell you from personal experience that they did a hell of a job, a good job, and they were tough. Next slide. Wow, look at that rally. Standing room only. That rally would last 3 to 4 hours. People were so ginned up about it. They loved it. Next slide. Well, this photo is taken from the top of the Capitol building in Sacramento. You are looking at 10,000 people gathered at the state capitol in Sacramento to support Cesar Chavez and his farm worker movement. What a difference between the photo you saw in the second day of the march and what was waiting for them or would be waiting for them in Sacramento. Amazing, amazing. Next slide. And here is Cesar Chavez with his armband. Right behind him is Gilbert Padilla, one of the vice presidents of the NFWA. Confident, unrattled. He is going to be, he with others, but he will be, of course, the key speaker. Brings back a lot of memories for me, I'll tell you that. Next slide. This is a strange slide, perhaps, to you. 1970, United Farm Workers boycott California grapes. Full-time staff members in 28 cities. I'm not going to read the cities, it takes too long. But you can glance at the cities and see 28 cities. I'm being very conservative here, but I can tell you that there's more than 1,000 full-time staff volunteers there whose only mission in life for 2 years was to stop the purchase of California table grapes. And they did that through speaking to every group in the community where they were located, unions, churches, high schools, colleges. If there was a group they could talk to, they talked to them. They had picket lines in front of the supermarket stores, different kinds of protests. They raised money to support the movement. The long and short of it is that it was the boycott of California grapes that won the Delano grape strike. Chavez was right. The growers ran out of time. Thank you very much. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take as many questions as the moderator would like me to answer.
Thank you, LeRoy, so much. If you were presenting in person, we would be giving you a standing ovation right now. There are several questions that have come in the chat and in the Q&A, and I want to kind of pitch them to you, LeRoy, and we can kind of work through them one by one. And there might even be I think I saw a hand floating up too. There might be some live interaction, possibly if Andrew can figure that out. But let me start with the first question, LeRoy, because again, this question came in this morning. And this question is from Nick Jones. He wanted to ask you if you believe whether or not farm workers can gain, right, in the future, coverage under the National Labor Relations Act. And as a sub follow to that, LeRoy, I mean, if you just want to talk generally about, you know, how farm workers do and don't fit under American labor law, you know, I would love to hear your perspective on that as well.
Well, first of all, it was Governor Jerry Brown who introduced legislation in California in 1975 that encouraged farm workers to organize into union. And the law that he passed and signed, well, it was passed through the legislature, of course, and he signed, protected the rights of farm workers to organize their own union. So the law, there's only one state where it's legal and protected, and that's California. Now that doesn't make it easy to organize any union anywhere, but it can be done. And there are union contracts still. I mean, United Farm Worker union contracts. In terms of the National Labor Relations, no. Will they ever be under the National Labor Relations Act? I don't think so. Politically, I don't think the political will is there.
Okay, thank you.
That's my answer.
Thank you, LeRoy. There are, again, several other questions, so we want to try to get to as many as you can. And I just also want to cue my colleague, Andrew Bond. Andrew, if there's anybody who is raising their hand or wants to live question, please, Andrew, jump in and defer.
Yeah, we have Ken. Is it Ken Seaton? I don't want to mess up your last name, Ken. But if you unmute yourself, you can ask your question or make your comment. It might be a misclick to raise hand, though.
Here we go.
Oh, there we are. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, LeRoy, to me, is one of the greatest human beings who's ever been a part of struggling for justice in California and throughout the country. And his presentation reminds me of what we went through when Cesar convinced us to organize a labor union for domestic workers and let us do that for its first 28 years. I had no idea how similar some of the passions and the struggles and the losses and the victories were until listening to LeRoy here. This is important because the world won't have justice for all of its people until people like LeRoy and Cesar and others continue to relentlessly fight for justice, no matter what, and hold out until we all win.
Thank you, Ken, for that comment. LeRoy, I don't know if you wanted to respond to Ken's comment.
Thanks, Ken. Your words are very generous. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ken. Again, if there are others who would like to raise their hand or participate, just raise the hand and I'll have my colleague Andrew try to work you in. Again, there are several other questions, so I want to try to be true to the chat box and folks who are submitting. So there's a question from Glenn. He writes, did you build a relationship with any of the Filipino labor organizers or members, Philip Veracruz, for example?
Philip Veracruz and I were very good friends. And I say this in this way. I mean, I can show it in this way. Every time we had staff retreats, and we had them all the time for planning purposes and all the staff members would come. And invariably, Philip and I would sit together. We just enjoyed each other's company, and Philip played a very important role, I think, in Delano, because in this way, hundreds of visitors, volunteers came to Delano to want to help do something. Well, I mean, we were all busy and doing what we're supposed to be doing, and it takes time to work with people who just show up, and that's what Philip did. He sat there in Filipino Hall and he would have seminars right on the spot about what was going on, the history of farm workers, the history of the Filipinos, the history of farm labor, and he did a great job. Great job. I knew Larry Itliong very, very well. In fact, we shared office space at Filipino Hall. And I got to know him very well. I would say, well, I'm thinking now. There was a Filipino striker who was on my staff when I was the head of the Robert F. Kennedy Farm Workers Medical Plan, and anyway, so I did have that day-to-day personal relationship with the Filipinos, of course.
Okay, thank you, LeRoy. We do have some other questions, and I just want to comment since you brought up a Filipino Hall in Delano, especially for students. And if you happen to be a student listening and you live in Delano, the Larry Itliong grave is in Delano at the Delano Cemetery. And of course, you can also visit the Filipino Hall that LeRoy's mentioning. So check out those historic locations if you can. The next question from an anonymous attendee was, what was your experience with Dolores Huerta and any other UFW women?
Well, most of my experience with the UFW women was with Helen Chavez. I just want to make sure that people know that Cesar could not have done what he did if he did not have Helen Chavez at his side doing it with him. she was not just a passive observer who, well, my husband is doing this or whatever. She was part and parcel of the strike. She was arrested, went to jail because of her. She was picketing, and the district attorney ruled that that was wrong. I mean, that was a violation. So they were shouting, well, that's what it was. They were shouting, strike, strike, strike. So they were rounded up and taken to jail. So that was my day-to-day contact, really, was with Helen Chavez. I know Dolores, know her very well. And she, when I knew her, when I was there at that time, she spent a lot of time in the New York area organizing the Great Boycott. And she would come back to Delano for, you know, but she was mostly out there, as she is now, speaking out, doing whatever she can to bring public attention to social justice issues.
Yeah, I will say that the thrust of the question, there was other questions in the chat related to this, I think was just trying to acknowledge, like you say, that there were a number of women, right, who were really important in the farm worker struggle, not only Dolores Huerta. And I'll also say that Bakersfield College is hosting the Smithsonian's Revolution in the Fields exhibit for the next year virtually, which is a tribute to the life and legacy of Dolores. So we appreciate your comments, LeRoy. A few other questions coming in from the chat. I want to make sure we get to those. Another anonymous question. It says, I'm going to add something onto this question because you mentioned something earlier. The question says, did you meet any other Catholic religious leaders that supported the farm workers? And I'd really love it, LeRoy, if you can comment on the migrant ministry and the kind of ecumenical flavor of religion and the farm worker movement, right? I mean, you come from a Catholic background, but you know, as I understand, you know, the farm worker movement was a totally ecumenical type of movement.
Oh, it was almost built with ecumenical movement. The key player, of course, was Chris Hartmeyer, Presbyterian minister, and he was the director of the California Migrant Ministry. And he and Jim Drake, and there were several others, half a dozen total, they were full-time as volunteers to do whatever was to be done to, just like the rest of us, to build a farm worker movement. The Catholic Church, unfortunately, I mean, I'm talking about the official Catholic Church now, was very slow to get involved. And one of the reasons, there are probably many reasons, but one of the reasons is that communism was such a bad word in that time, and the Catholic Church was so opposed to communism. So any talk that there might be communists or outside agitators, that was another synonym for communists, you know. So they were slow to, well, and the other reality, let's face it, the other reality is the growers, for the most part, were all Catholics. And so their support of the church, their financial support of the church was, you know, the church did not want to get sideways with them and cut off the collection basket kind of thing. So, but ultimately, because of the National Bishops Committee, who endorsed the strike, endorsed the boycott, that they really came on board in a big way. Monsignor Boyle from San Francisco, he was one of the very first ones. But once again, he did that as an individual. He was not authorized to do it, and he wasn't sanctioned to do it. So In the early days of the farm worker movement, nuns and priests, if they came, and some did, they were on their own. And they were not there authorized by their bishop or their religious superior. They were there for whatever event or whatever to show their support. Some walked the 300-mile march, but they were there on their own. It was not officially sanctioned.
Okay, thank you for that response, LeRoy. We have another question that came in, I think, in relation to maybe the map that you were showing, LeRoy, and the march from Delano to Sacramento. The question says, do you know if the march went through Orosi or the Cutler area? And is there a map of the route that was taken?
Well, one of the slide has the march route. I read the towns that it stopped in overnight. I don't have those memorized. Let's see.
I think Andrew's going to pull it up on the screen for the audience here.
Yeah, but it's very hard to read all of the towns. At least for my view is. I'm looking at my notes here.
And just as you're looking through your notes, oh, look, there's a zoom in right there. I don't see Orosi on. Oh, there's the Cutler area. You can see that.
Yeah, Orosi is not on that list. No, I don't know why they didn't stop in Orosi. I don't know, but
there is a great song about Orosi that's related to farm workers. That's what I was thinking of as that question rolled in.
Yeah, no, Ducors. I mean, no, Orosi is not on the list. Maybe they walked through Orosi. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a hip hop group named Bamboo, and they wrote a song about Orosi. So I appreciate that question. Thank you, Andrew, for pulling up the map. I want to ask you, LeRoy, about the Farm Worker Movement Documentation Project. I've been plugging this in the chat to our over 80 plus attendees. The Farm Worker Movement Documentation Project is such a jewel, like when it comes to historical research and teaching. Can you just talk a little bit about like your role in starting that and why you decided to kind of do that and how it got picked up by the University of California?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. My wife and I retired from Loaves and Fishes. I retired from Loaves and Fishes in Sacramento 4 times. The first time was when I turned 65 in the millennium year 2000. My wife and I did the Camino de Santiago. We walked 450 miles from Pied-à-Port, France, to San Diego de la Compostela. And on that march, all you do is just walk, and it gives you the opportunity to think about things and think about yourself. And anyway, I had retired, right? And so what am I going to do? I didn't know what I was going to do, but I began to realize that people were interested in the farm worker movement and were beginning to write things about it that, frankly, I didn't think were accurate or that accurate. They were accurate, okay, but it wasn't really, I didn't think it was helpful to Cesar and his farm worker movement. So I decided that I would publish online. I would reconstruct the farm worker movement from 1962 to 1993 when Chavez died. I would, for example, there's 13,000 photos on the Documentation Project website. There are movies, there are the Huelga songs, there's El Teatro, there's the boycott, there's essays, memoirs, there's the names of all the volunteers. It took me 8 years to build the information for that website. And to back up the website, to give you an idea how big it is, how huge it is, New York Times about the farm worker movement is on that website, and the San Francisco Chronicle, just using that as those are examples, and oral histories, and on and on and on. And my attitude was, if I could put the firsthand information, the documentation that was available 24/7 to anyone in the world, then you couldn't, if you wanted to make up stuff about the farm worker movement, well, that's fine. That's a fiction, that's a novel. But if you wanted the information about the farm worker movement from beginning to end, or at least till Cesar died, then here it is. And it is huge. It is huge. And the way to, I'll finish. It's because of Jorge Mariscal, professor at UC Santa Barbara, that the documentation project ended up being hosted by their library. And that is honestly because he was so helpful to me during those 8 years, and very affirming and encouraging, and helped me to support it, and brought me to UC San Diego many times to update the faculty, et cetera, about the progress. And so I wanted to host it there if I could, and they agreed to acquire it and to host it. And personally, I mean, I just think it's wonderful. But
yeah, thank you, LeRoy, for that response. And I selfishly asked that question because my students have been using it for years, ever since I think it was first started, and then when it got picked up by the University of California. And it's just such an amazing treasure trove of resources. So thank you for starting that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Well, on that note, we have time for just one more question. So I will be very brief with this one, LeRoy. I know you've been going for 90 minutes almost now. There was somebody who asked if you saw the movie, Cesar Chavez, and just kind of what you thought about it. And as a kind of follow-up to that, there was another question that said that somebody have read sources that the farm workers union only organized quote unquote American farm workers, whatever that means, right? So they wanted to know your response to that, perhaps, you know, about maybe the relationship between the United Farm Workers and undocumented immigrants. But take on either one of those questions if you like, LeRoy.
The first one was?
Oh, if you saw the movie, Cesar Chavez.
Oh, no, yeah, okay, but no, I did not see the movie. I do not see movies like that because I was there, and I'm too critical, too judgmental, and I don't think the movie, I didn't see the movie. I don't think a movie like that is going to tell the story of what Cesar Chavez and his farm worker movement. Now, that's my bias, but of course, you know, you have to realize now I'm an old man, so, you know, I shouldn't be so judgmental about things like that, but you know, I know what I saw. I remember what I did and didn't do. I remember what others did and didn't do. And I don't want to be arguing with a movie about what happened. You know, I know what happened. And if they want to know what happened, if they go to the Farm Worker Movement Documentation Project, they can judge for themselves what happened. So I don't mean to get carried away about this, but
No, we love it, Leroy. Did you want to take on the last question about, the relationship between the farm workers and quote unquote American farm workers or undocumented
no,
immigrants?
I mean, with all due respect here, this is sort of a veiled question, isn't it? In other words, charges have been brought, so to speak, charges against Cesar because he didn't support the undocumented workers or something like that. I mean, I don't know. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, the question was a little nebulous as written. It just wanted to know.
Let me just say, look, if Cesar's mother crossed the UFW picket line, he would be on her case and not support her, and he would be angry about it and upset about it and do everything he could to prevent her from crossing the picket line and breaking the strike, right? I mean, so strike breakers, he would not tolerate. He had nothing against undocumented workers at all. But if an undocumented worker came for the purpose of breaking the strike, hey, that's a whole different ballgame. So let's not confuse the two, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you, Leroy. I just want to say in closing, again, we thank you so much for being here. I feel like I've been with you for a year, Leroy, because my students have been reading your book for a year. We were supposed to have this event last year because of COVID.
Right.
So again, I look forward to continuing to assign your book and promote your work and projects. I just want to say in closing that I encourage everyone who's still here that we have programming for the Just Nieto conference all week, including a talk by Professor Eladio Bobadilla of the University of Kentucky, whose doctoral research at Duke University actually focuses on the history of undocumented peoples within the US labor and civil rights movement writ large. Thank you, everyone. Well, this concludes our programming for the evening. So thank you so much. I hope to see many of you at the events later this week. Thank you. Thank you, Leroy.
Thank you.